Welcome to our first seminar series event for this year. I am Sadaf Khabar, the co-chair for the Autism Special Interest Group, which is part of ABCT. We are delighted to have you all join us. Our Autism SIG collaborates with autistic self-advocates and focuses on work that is aligned with the priorities of the autistic community, which includes promoting meaningful clinical care. We do rely on member donations to support our travel awards, our virtual seminar series events like today's event, and other events every year, which includes our pre-conference as well as part of the annual ABCT meeting. Please consider donating. The QR code is right here on the screen, and we will also share our link in the chat as well. To get to know more about our several initiatives, you can visit our website, follow us on social media as well. And for now, please do save the date for our next seminar series event, which is in April. More details will follow in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that. We also have exciting events coming up for the next ABCT conference in New Orleans. We hope to see many of you there as well. We would be very happy to host whoever is able to make it in person. For today's event, I'm delighted to introduce our presenters. Elodie Carel is a clinical psychology doctoral student at UMass Amherst and has a passion for the creation and dissemination of accessible materials related to research. Dr. Ashley Woodman is the program director for the Developmental Disabilities in Human Service program and a senior lecturer in psychological and brain sciences at UMass Amherst. Without further ado, we would love to hear from our presenters, and we're very excited. Over to you both.
Thank you.
Hi all, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. So we're going to plan to talk for about 45 minutes about addressing accessibility barriers in academic presentations and research, because research is for everyone. And then we've also got set up for folks who are going to be here today a QR code. And this QR code links to both our slides for anyone who wants to follow along, as well as some other resources that we are going to talk about throughout the course of the presentation. So feel free to scan that and head on over if that's something that's of interest to you. And I completely forgot, I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. And my visual self-description is that I am a white person in my early to mid 20s with brown hair and a ponytail. And Ashley, I will let you go as well.
I'm Ashley Woodman, use she, her pronouns. Visual description, I'm Caucasian with brown hair, staring down the barrel of age 40 coming up in a few weeks. I think I'll leave it at that.
So before we dive too far into all of the details of the presentation, I did want to clarify how we're going to be using two different terms today. The first is screen reader, and this refers to a piece of assistive technology, in this case, a computer program that reads the text on the computer out loud. Some folks who use screen readers are blind. Some folks who use screen readers also have vision. And while accommodating all types of screen readers are important, the majority of neurodivergent folks who use screen readers will probably use that second type of screen reader, most commonly known as a sighted screen reader. Second, I am sure that everyone here is familiar with terms like neurodivergent and neurodiversity, but I also know that sometimes people use it to mean different things. So I wanted to clarify today that this presentation will be using the term neurodiversity or neurodivergent person in its more expansive form, rather than using it just as an alternative way of saying autism or ADHD. So I'm really talking about a broader range of people when I refer to neurodivergent people.
And before we jump into the nitty-gritty on how we can make conference presentations more accessible, we would first like to situate this topic within the broader conversation around inclusive research. So in this slide are the first 6 of 15 statements from the Manifesto for Inclusive Research from the Inclusive Research Special Interest Group of the International Association for the Scientific Study of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, or IASD. And sorry, just to double check, do we have the captions on? I'm not seeing them, so maybe someone in the background can turn this on. Aim 1, aim to make our lives better. So research which aims to change our lives, our communities, and our society for the better. Aim 2, be about our issues and make sense to us. So research about our issues which makes sense to us and where our experiences help shape the form that the research takes. Aim 3, reflect our experience. So research which records, values, and talks about the experience of people with disabilities. 4, support our campaigns. So research where its information can be used by people with disabilities to campaign for change. 5, have advocates and academic researchers standing together. So academic researchers should co-work with researchers with disabilities on their issues, respecting the essential partnership. And 6, make the research processes and findings accessible. So all-inclusive research should aim to make the materials of the research, proposals, questionnaires, surveys, and especially the findings and recommendations of the research accessible to as wide an audience as possible. So this, of course, is the topic of today's discussion, but we hope that you'll explore inclusive research more generally after today's talk. Specific to autism research, we recommend you visit the Academic Autism Spectrum Partnership in Research and Education, or ASPIRE website, to learn more about best practices in inclusive research. So we did include it, ASPIRE, on our recommendation doc in the Google Drive. Again, just thinking about situating this conversation within bigger picture, what is your role in inclusive dissemination of research? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done at the conference planning level for successful inclusion of autistic or disabled researchers and community members at academic conferences. So if you are involved in the planning of virtual or in-person conferences, we highly recommend you read the access suggestions for public events published by SINS Invalid. Though not specific to academic conferences, it provides an excellent list of recommendations for inclusive events. So looks like my tech is not teching. There we go. Oh, that did not work. Sorry, that was supposed to be moving, but that's okay. Skip that. If you're not currently involved in conference planning, speak up about the accessibility barriers that you're noticing as a conference participant. So when you get those post-conference surveys, don't hold back. Advocate for change, write letters, make phone calls, or even consider volunteering for planning committees in the future. To those of you leading research teams, we encourage you to lead by example. So set expectations for your team around the accessibility of all publications, social media posts, and conference presentations. Providing templates to your team can be a great way to facilitate this change, and we're going to come back to this in a little bit. Also make sure that your lab's website is accessible and includes information about your work in formats that are easy to understand by researchers and non-researchers alike. Most lab websites are not accessible. The remainder of what we're going to talk about today really focuses on what you can do as an individual researcher. So with a focus on conference presentations. So what can you do to make your oral and poster presentations more accessible?
So when it comes to setting the tone at the beginning of your talk or your poster or whatever, you want to create an inclusive space, and those first few minutes can be critical in setting that tone. So consider introducing yourself with things like pronouns, a visual self-description, which is when you describe what you look like out loud, the way that Ashley and I did at the beginning of this talk. And this could be beneficial to a wide range of people, from someone who is blind and might be curious to someone who is listening to your presentation while they're driving in a car. This is a virtual presentation. We don't know what you're doing on the other end of this. So that might be helpful or interesting for some people. And then for in-person events, you might also consider inviting audience members to get up, move around, stim, etc., whatever they need during your presentation. And then the sort of virtual version of this is not requiring that people's cameras be on. If being on camera is an option for your audience during the virtual presentation. And this can increase the accessibility of space for a wide range of people, but it is also worth noting that you may want to encourage people as well, if they can, to keep their camera on, because folks who are deaf or hard of hearing may be lip reading as well. Accessibility is complicated and sometimes conflicting, but just some thoughts. And then I think it's also important to start by thinking about what the goal of your conference presentation slides are, so that we kind of go in with a frame of what we are thinking about when we're thinking about why we're making things accessible. So this is usually going to boil down to wanting to provide a visual support to your main talking points and showing your audience your results. And that's often going to be in the form of graphs or tables, but doesn't necessarily have to be. So more broadly, the goal of most research slides is to support the entire audience's understanding of your presentation topic. And supporting understanding for everyone includes supporting understanding for people with disabilities. So now that we've kind of set that frame, let's start talking about some of the specifics. I wanted to start off by emphasizing the importance of conveying information through multiple modalities. Reading in overstimulating conference environments can be a challenge for some people. So by doing things like including descriptions in your oral presentation, you'll increase the amount of information that a person can access. But on the flip side, some people might have more challenges with auditory processing. So these people will benefit from having the written text on your slide. So it's important to be saying what you mean both out loud and having it on your slide to increase the number of ways that any given audience member can access your slides or your presentation as a whole. And then providing multiple modalities of processing information also means making your slides accessible so that someone can pull them up and use them to support their understanding of your presentation in real time, or revisit your presentation later so that they have more time to process and think about your presentation, or to listen to slide elements like that really cool graph you showed with a screen reader. And then when conferences allow presenters to upload their slides as part of the official conference platform, it streamlines the process for conference attendees to be able to access the slides. So instead of having to navigate through multiple different platforms, you click this QR code here, that link there, and then there's also the conference app over here and something happening over there. You just do it all through the conference app or website when that file upload is baked into the platform. So for any conference organizers who are here today, please take note, and everyone else, this is something to advocate for within the groups or those conference feedback forms that Ashley was talking about, or any other way that you have to share your thoughts. And then moving along, captions in a conference environment are also super important. And there can also be some very real logistical barriers to captions, especially to individuals. So in an ideal world, you would have a live captioner, especially for technical presentations, who is getting what you say word for word, and getting it out to the audience quickly and accurately. And this is somewhere that conference organizers can really step up, advocate for things like live captions and ASL within their leadership role. And this is also something to advocate for in that feedback form. Again, if you're not already part of some higher level group that gets to make those big decisions. But your second best option is going to be something like PowerPoint, Google Slides captions, even Zoom captions. They've improved a lot over the last 5 years. That is one of the nice things that has come in my mind, largely in light of COVID. So in a lot of situations, these captions are going to be a whole lot better than nothing, and they're absolutely improving. But there are still real challenges that are associated with these captions. I would say the biggest issue is around technical language. They still really struggle with getting that technical language, or language that is like an acronym or something specific to your work that may not be a common word. They also might struggle with some accents, so that's actually getting a little bit better, and differences in speech patterns. But for example, we're going to see what the captions do when I say Elodie. Okay, it actually got it, not proving my point. But until very recently, this was very consistent. It would do the letters LED or turn Elodie into eel. So in situations where you know you're going to be using a lot of technical language, you might want to consider practicing your presentation with the captions going, making note of where you see those errors popping up, and creating a guide that you put in that conference's resources folder, like we were talking about, so that at the beginning of the session, your audience can see, oh, this word probably actually means this, if they're predominantly using the captions. This plan is not perfect, and there's definitely still issues, especially for things like panel discussions. And I get that adding an additional Bluetooth mic can be hard because of that double mic feedback it'll create, and then it's just unpleasant for everyone. But this is another place that conference organizers can really advocate for having technology that is both capable of accurate captioning and broadcasting audio out to your audience in a way that works for everyone. So if we have any organizers here, please take note and consider adding that into your plan for your next conference. This one is such a biggie, which is one of the reasons we are doing it first. So that, and again, feedback forms. Can't emphasize enough.
All right, so we're just going to jump into some tips for successful auto captioning, if that's the only thing that's available to you. So first, and perhaps most importantly, speak clearly and at a moderate pace. So I just wanted to quickly show you, and it looks like my video disappeared. I don't know what's going on. I was going to show you. Do you see it?
Or wait, no, you mean on the slide? No,
Oh,
I can see.
never mind. Here it
camera.
is. Okay, it was invisible. Sorry. What a speech rate of 140 words per minute actually looks like. Sounds like, rather. Oh, something's going on. It's converted it to an image. I'm sorry. We'll make sure that the slides in the Google Drive have the videos in there. I'm not sure what happened to this. But it's a lot slower than you think is kind of the take-home message. And you can test this. So I had my Speechify app reading the SIG's mission statement at 140 words per minute, but there's a lot of other tools that you can use to check and see how quickly you're speaking. So just to rehash some of these other suggestions, Elodie already kind of touched on. So avoid overlapping speech. So this is going to be particularly helpful for presentations with multiple speakers or like panels. Use simple, direct language and avoid jargon. Again, it's probably worth hiring a professional captioner if you know you need to use a lot of jargon that's not being well understood by an auto caption. Identify the speakers. So this is very common in disability community gatherings. You'll often hear people start with, "This is Ashley speaking," and then they'll say what they want to say. This is good practice for any presentation, but especially helpful when you know someone's relying on the captions and multiple people are talking. Lastly, use a high quality microphone. So there's lots of different ways to be successful with miking a space. Again, leaning on conference infrastructure whenever possible. But I have a lovely little cheap, portable Bluetooth mic that I bring around with me everywhere. And it comes in handy, especially when you know the computer that is presenting the slides is going to be detached from where the speaker is actually sitting. Those Bluetooth mics can be really helpful.
So then transitioning a little bit to talking about what should actually be on your slides. So one important thing to keep in mind is keeping your slides relatively simple and avoiding too much visual clutter. And I know that my slide style, which you guys are seeing today, tends to err on a little bit of the boring side. And some of that is just the way that I like to make slides. So there's absolutely room to have fun with your slides. But at the end of the day, communicating your message should probably take precedence over having too much fun. So keeping your slides free of too much of that visual clutter will help minimize some of that unnecessary sensory input and focus on the message that you are trying to convey instead. I think the content on your slide, especially when it comes to graphics, can also be really powerful. So I know when I look at my slide, the first thing that my eye jumps to is the anti-clutter symbol, and then the little graph chart PowerPoint question mark symbol. And those things alone tell me that we're going to talk something about not clutter and then something about some sort of symbol. And then from there, I know my eyes personally jump to the words. And with the combination of those things, I can tell that we are talking about avoiding visual clutter and that graphics can support engagement and understanding of your material. So this is one way that graphics can be really powerful in supporting that understanding. And personally, when I pick a graphic, I like to pick something that's relatively simple in line of keeping your slides free of too much visual clutter. Personally, I really like overall a black and white color scheme and using icons kind of in the vein of symbol support. I think that it looks clean, it looks cohesive, professional, and it also helps avoid looking overly cartoonish or childish, but there's lots of different ways to do this. Some of this is personal style and some of it is accessibility, and you can find icons for almost anything through Google searches or platforms like Canva. So it's really easy to incorporate into your presentations. But it is also important that if you are going to use graphics or honestly anything that's not just straight text, that it's going to be accessible to folks who might be accessing your slides through that conference platform or QR code. And one part of that is making sure that you are including appropriate alt text. So alt text is a form of text that is only visible to those screen readers we were talking about before. And it lets people who might not be able to see your slides understand what an image says. And the goal of alt text is that it should succinctly describe an image. And if an image is only decorative, you should mark it as decorative within that alt text menu. And we'll talk a little bit more about alt text on the next slide, but I did also want to quickly highlight that in general, it's nice if the background of your graphic, if it's something like the type of graphic on the screen, can be transparent or otherwise match with the background of your slide. Again, it helps to reduce some of that visual overwhelm for something that's not particularly essential to your message. And then here you guys can see a screenshot of this particular graphic, which is marked as decorative. I didn't think that it added any particular substantive meaning to the slide. So you can see how I have right-clicked, opened up the alt text menu and marked it as decorative. And in case you guys are wondering what an example of alt text for a substantive image might look like, this image has been marked with the alt text screenshot of a PowerPoint presentation with the alt text menu open on the right side of the screen to demonstrate how to access the alt text menu. This is probably a little bit on the longer side of what you'd want to do, but basically I'm explaining what the image is and why it's there without saying, and there's like 7 slides visible on the left and there's a menu up top and all of this other unnecessary stuff. I'm explaining what the image is and why it's there. There's a whole lot more that you can dig into if you want to learn about alt text, but that's your basics.
All right, so some things to keep in mind if you're inserting graphics into your presentation slides. So select graphics and images that actually reflect the autistic population. Obviously, I'm saying this to the autism SIG at the moment. Be mindful of the many intersectional identities that autistic people hold and disrupt stereotypes about who can be autistic. Disability clip art is notoriously lacking, so you may need to work a little harder to find good free resources. I've included here some recommendations for inclusive illustrations at the top right of the slide from Disability In. They actually provide the alt text for all of their illustrations. And at the bottom right of the slide, photos from Disability is Beautiful. So in this resource, these are actually photos created by the disability community for free dissemination. But be aware of AI biases if you are using ChatGPT or other AI platforms to generate images or graphics for your presentation. This is becoming increasingly popular and it's even like built into PowerPoint now. But of course, the biases of AI reflect the biases of our society. So In thinking about clip art for this presentation, for example, in the first picture, I asked ChatGPT for a clip art of a person presenting at a conference. And of course, this was assumed to be a white male without a visible disability. And you'll notice, of course, that the audience does not include people with visible disability either. Then I asked ChatGPT to replace the speaker with a Black woman, which it did successfully, not too many other changes. But then I asked it to replace the speaker with a Black woman in a wheelchair, and this worked for the most part, but note how the content of her presentation changed. So instead of a generic slide with blurred graphics and text, the content of the presentation changed to the international symbol for disability. So in other words, a person in a wheelchair presenting at a conference could only possibly be talking about disability. So as another minor note, AI also tends to generate images of transfer chairs and not wheelchairs. So transfer chairs are intended to be pushed by someone else, not independently moved by the wheelchair user. So just something to keep an eye out for.
And then stats tables. We know them, we love them, we all put them in our presentations, but they need to be made accessible. And there's a couple different ways that you can do that. So you can start up front by saying what you mean in plain English before you dive in and get technical. I am not saying by any means that you have to keep your entire presentation in plain language. I get that we're talking about scientific presentations here, but you can also say what you mean up front so that a wider range of people can follow what it is that you are saying. And then you dive in and talk about like your partial eta squared or whatever else it is that you are doing that might not be meaningful without some very specific scientific training. And then your explanation of your tables may also be context dependent. So some of this is being mindful about what you want to highlight. So if you look at this table here, I have opted first for my title to represent the finding, right? So if you are reading, you can read what exactly it is that this table is intended to convey. And then I also have appropriate headers here so that a screen reader will be able to read what it is that the table is discussing. And appropriate headers for a table mean that that first row and that first column, if you listened to those two things together and the cell that that corresponds with, you should be able to understand what that means. So here, this might read, dynamicity microaggressions 0.28 star star star. And from there, if you're used to listening to this sort of thing in a screen reader, you will probably be able to infer what it is that is being referred to. And then Ashley, could you click this? Thank you. So some people will also use visual indicators like that box that just appeared. And this can be helpful in directing the focus of the audience, but you just want to make sure that you mark that visual indicator as being decorative in the alt text so that there's not some shape that's just like showing up for a screen reader user that they don't understand the context of. If you could not see this slide and you knew that there was some text and that there was a table and that there was a random rectangle, you might have a hard time figuring out without looking at the slide what exactly it was that that random rectangle was doing. And then contrast is also important when you are designing slides. And this supports both people in general, as we'll see when we get to the next slide, but also specifically folks with visual impairments. So generally, you want to aim of a contrast ratio for at least 4.5 to 1 between your text graphic and your background. The minimum standard is technically 3.3 to 1 for most things, but in most situations, it should not be that hard to get to a 4.5 to 1 ratio. But you also want to be mindful that you are not using too much contrast because this can be difficult to look at for some folks, especially who have sensory sensitivities. So this is color combinations like black on white or neon on almost anything. You might notice that our slides today are light gray, and that is specifically because we are trying to avoid some of that really harsh black on white text to background. And then when it comes to the background color of your slides, there's two approaches that you can take here. I have taken the approach of gray, but light yellow is also considered a very accessible color because it is considered the most dyslexia friendly, especially when paired with dark blue text. I know a lot of folks don't love this color combination, but if you have, especially if you're ever presenting in a dyslexia specific context, you really might want to consider doing that. Again, you should be conveying your message before you have too much fun with those slides. And then many folks in autism-friendly spaces will opt for that light gray background with dark gray text to avoid eye strain. And to some degree, if you share your PowerPoint with other people through a QR code or that conference platform, you can be a little bit more flexible in what your choice is because people can customize the background color of the slides in a way that works for them. But for the folks not following along on their own computers during your presentation, sticking to that general guideline of 4.5 to 1 contrast without creating a sensory nightmare is going to be best practice. So you can see here, we have an example of 3 very different contrasts. And I don't know about everyone else, but there is one of these that sticks out to me by far as the most desirable to read. So you can see here, this is a place where contrast is supporting everyone, not just folks with disabilities. I don't know about you, I would not be particularly interested in reading an entire presentation either in that light gray text or neon green text. It's just painful. And then there is a tool called WebAIM as well. And this is a screenshot of WebAIM. You can find a link to it in the slides, and it will tell you the contrast ratio and if it's going to pass those minimum both 3 to 1 standards and then the 4.1 to 1 standards marked as WCAG AA and WCAG AAA respectively. It's also worth noting, does anyone else notice how that white background is somewhat unpleasant against some of the darker colors? Again, access is meant to support everyone. It is also important too, when you are designing, especially charts for your presentation, that you don't use color alone to convey meaning. So you're going to want to use an additional modality of some sort. On this graph here, I have opted to use different patterns, but you could also provide really clear labels. And this is going to look a little bit different depending on what sort of chart you're using. But this is because red-green color blindness in particular, but color blindness in general is actually relatively common amongst especially folks who are assigned male at birth. And this affects 8% of folks who are assigned male, which is a fairly substantial proportion of your audience. And if you are filling a medium to large size room with your conference presentation, as I know everyone here is, you're going to have at least a couple people who may not be able to understand what your charts are saying if you are not using a modality other than color to convey meaning. So highly recommend. And then being mindful about your font is also important. So if you look at the graphic on the right, you can see how a sans serif T looks compared to a serif T, and how there's like this little extra decorative piece on the serif T. And sans serif fonts are easier for a lot of neurodivergent folks to read because they remove that unnecessary decoration. The best practice is generally considered Verdana or Calibri, and we are using Verdana in the presentation today. And then your font size should be big enough that it can be read, for obvious reasons if you want people reading your slides. And then the larger the font size is, the better, until you start getting to that point where it's going to impair readability because you can't fit enough words on your slide. Usually, it depends a little bit on exactly how much text there is on this slide, but you probably don't want to go too much bigger than 125 font for any sort of like big title or header, and then you'll work your way down as you get to different types of fonts or different types of text and their purposes. And then it is also worth noting that a lot of people with neurodivergencies, especially dyslexia, report that left-aligned text is the easiest to read. You'll notice that most of the text in this presentation is left-aligned. The world is not going to end if you center a title or something like that, but the general consensus is that left-aligned text will make it easier for your audience to read your slides. And then case usage also matters too. And I'm realizing I made a case usage mistake on this slide about case usage. But first off, avoiding blocks of all caps makes it easier to read a word because of the way that there is variation in the height of the letters. So if you look at the orange highlighted text on the right, you can see how in all caps, these words sort of appear as rectangles. And then you have to think a little bit harder about teasing out each word, whereas when there's more variation in the height, it makes it easier to figure out what any given word is. And then when it comes to especially your headers, you want to consider using sentence case versus title case. And this is because a lot of people generally find sentence case easier to read than title case. Title case is when the first letter of each word is capitalized, and sentence case is like what you'd read in a sentence, the majority of the text on the slide. And then the spacing that you choose for your slides is also important. So 1.5 is generally going to be reported as easiest to read, but honestly, anything is better than nothing. So if you can only get your slides to 1.15, that is better than 1, which is better than 0.5, which is better than 0. And while 2-point spacing is technically considered best practice by WCAG, a lot of folks find that the lines are too far apart to actually read as smoothly as possible. And then there is an increasing focus on community engagement with research, especially in the autism field. And this includes bringing your community partners to conferences. Again, I am not advocating to throw out all of the science words all the time, but hitting that main point in plain language before you dive in to that super sciencey explanation can make it such that it is easier for those folks who are not traditionally invited into research spaces to understand what you are talking about. And then the general rule of thumb for plain language is that you want to stick to a 6th to 8th grade reading level, with plain language being that like slightly easier to understand version of the summary that I was talking about. And there's a ton more resources about plain language if that's something you're interested in.
All right. I think in the interest of time, we might go quickly through some of these slides. We were worried about not having enough for 45 minutes, but we're doing okay. So some guidelines for writing in plain language. You can refer back to some of this later. We also have some additional resources on the doc. And there are tools out there to check the readability of your text, whether the text on your presentation slides or your kind of narration script. You can put that through online checkers or even built into Microsoft Word. And we include information on how to actually go about doing that. Another thing to keep in mind in conference presentations is how you offer options for your audience to ask questions. So at most conferences, at least the ones that I've been to, the only way to ask is to do this orally, which can limit who is able to participate in the Q&A. So of course, Zoom has some built-in chat and Q&A features, and we're going to be using that today. But when you're in a live presentation, you have a whole range of different options. So there are sort of like high-tech, fancy tech options like these live polling or Q&A apps like Slido or Mentimeter. Typically, there are some features that are available to you for free, and you have to pay for additional features. But it's not just Q&A. They also have all sorts of different polling options. Some more simple tech could be something like a Google form or a Padlet that people can quickly ask questions on. And of course, no tech, sticky notes, note cards, just having a wide range of ways that people can ask questions. I think we might skip this exercise. What do you think, Elodie? I was going to have you try out Slido and write the alt text for this image. So when I was thinking about an image, I just literally put image into Google image search, and it brought up this travel blog that said photos of people doing the things that make them really, really happy. And I thought this photo was great. So I think we'll skip over that, but I'll quickly show you that, you know, for Slido anyway, you'd get a QR code and also a link with a code for people to enter. So lots of different ways to get on there. And then it would open something like this. And as people kind of typed responses in, oh, someone's doing it, you could see this appear. So you can choose to let the responses auto-populate, no moderation, or you can moderate. And so if I click, then I am allowing the submissions to come up. Someone's typing something. Well, maybe we can come back, time permitting. But we quickly wanted to say a few things about posters.
I think we can skip the asking questions of people in the sake of time.
Okay.
But big picture, the general guidelines are going to be similar to preparing slides for an oral presentation.
And just as Elodie mentioned, for the oral presentations, you want to be prepared to talk about your poster in plain language. And this is something you might want to consider role playing within your lab right before a conference. Maybe find someone who has very little understanding about your topic or research in general, and try presenting kind of the main ideas of your poster to that audience. Spacing can be a little bit trickier on a poster, but when in doubt, space it out as much as you can. Some folks are moving toward this better poster format to quickly communicate like kind of the main idea of the project. And it not only benefits, you know, folks with disabilities, but also might get you wider recognition from more people kind of walking by. So on this slide, again, something funky happened with videos in this deck, but is a kind of video demonstration of why it's important to maybe consider the better poster format, because people are walking very quickly by your posters. Having something like you see on the right-hand side where the main idea is very visible and described in really plain English can, you know, increase the readability of your posters. We posted here on this slide some recommendations for font size to consider for posters. Ideally, you want to shoot for someone to be able to see it from about 10 feet away. So I'm not going to go through the details here. You can reference this later. Something that I really like to do, and I encourage others to do, is to create just different versions of posters. Often we just create a printed poster, and whoever, you know, comes by and sees it, that's all they get. But consider including a QR code on your poster so that people can access it online. As you can imagine, a lot of poster sessions are really busy, chaotic, loud spaces. People might want to just quickly snap your code and then read your poster on their own time. But by providing a QR code, you can also format the poster in whatever way makes sense. So we've talked a little bit about, you know, accessing raw files in PowerPoint versus PDF in terms of the alt text and the screen readers. Ability to read it. And I just quickly showed you why here. So a screen reader will read the objects on a, this is a PowerPoint version of a poster, in the order that you created them. So most people aren't even aware that PowerPoint has saved that order. It will actually read from the bottom to the top. So you might need to check your poster and see in what order you actually created the little dialog boxes and text boxes. Make sure you have the alt text in there. You can actually test and see how is a screen reader going to, you know, be reading my file. NV Access is a free online tool that you can download. And if this will work, this is how it will read. No such luck today. Okay, that's really bizarre. But you can check it out for yourself. We also did put the full video of the screen reader poster in the folder. I'm very sad that you're not going to hear this one because we wanted to show you what not to do. This is a Canva presentation slide in which, again, I don't think, oh, wait, maybe actually if I just, now
Are you
there's
screen sharing with sound?
That's what I was just going to double check. I don't see, I think I am, so I don't know. I don't want to waste too much time looking for it, but in this one, it basically, the screen reader reads, you know, about the pink dino and the yellow dino and the orange dino and the blue dino and all the trees in the background. And then you're kind of lost wondering what the slide is actually about. So you can make all of these images decorative if you need dinosaurs on your slide. All right. And templates save time. So a quick shout out to the University of Buffalo for their brand guidelines website actually includes templates for accessible posters. And you can see that the graphics have both color and pattern to indicate differences between the lines and parts of the pie chart, etc. But it also has ordered the objects on the poster in a logical way for a screen reader to access it. So just by editing this template, you're saving someone a lot of time. So if you are heading up a research lab, create your own template. Maybe encourage your university to set these templates up on their website with their own kind of colors and logos and such. So again, other formats to consider, the PowerPoint is better than the PDF, but there still might be instances where you'd rather have it in HTML. So this allows you to kind of change the way you're presenting the information entirely with the audience of screen readers in mind. So here on this slide, I have a link to a Google Doc template and also the same information on an HTML website. You want to, in both cases, think about the title, subtitle, headings, and make sure all of those actually make sense for your content, because that's how it's going to be read. So just as an example of reformatting content, on the left is kind of the printed poster, you know, bar graph, but that might not make sense even with alt text to someone reading it with a screen reader. So you might want to put it in a table. I've seen other people even just kind of write out in narrative format the words instead. All right, so this probably feels like a lot. Some of you might be familiar with some of these strategies already. Some of you, this might be brand new. The take-home messages here are that something is better than nothing. And it also depends on how well you know your audience. So those dinosaur slides, Elodie sent to one single stats professor that they knew could actually read the slides and wouldn't be distracted by the alt text of the dinosaurs. So consider who's in your audience. And if you don't know who's in your audience, err on the side of being as inclusive as possible. And you don't have to sacrifice design for accessibility, as we touched on earlier. And think about where on your campus you can go to test your documents and also get feedback. So this could be an assistive technology center, a disability cultural center, or the disability student office as well. Disabled student office, rather. Okay, we'll stop there and open it up for questions.
So I see that we've got one in the Q&A already. Wait, sorry, Sadaf, were you going to read the question? You were going to read it, weren't you? I'm stealing your thunder.
Go ahead and read it. For sure, go for it.
About how can we make sure we have sufficient font size while also dealing with conference time restraints that affect how many slides we can present. Sometimes I have a hard time using 18-point font because then I need more slides and end up taking longer to finish getting through everything. If it was me, I think I would start by designing my slides in a way where I know I can get through the talk within the amount of time that's allotted. And then once I have my talk down, I would space out those slides so that I'm not changing my talk per se. And my talk is still the same amount of time as it would be before. Maybe I'm changing slides more frequently than I would be otherwise. But I can get bigger font within the same amount of time. Ashley, I don't know if you have any additional insight.
That's great.